pretty much everything you need to know about taming and using a gacha in ARK Survival Evolved. Gachas can only be found at the northwestern part of the ARK Extinction DLC map in an area known as the Sunken Forest. Approximate coordinates for the entrance are 30.7 latitude and 24.3 longitude. Once you locate the entrance, you will have to descend down into the forest before you can begin seeing what can only be described as one of Steve Irwin's wet dreams. So there's a few quick things you need to know before we dive into taming here. You cannot tame a gacha if there is another gacha of the same gender nearby, so if there is one nearby, you will have to dispatch of it as you see fit. Gachas also cannot be tamed if they were recently engaged in combat, so give them a few minutes before you try to tame them if they were fighting something. If you're throwing down food and the gacha is looking away from the food rather than shoving it in that big Joker-esque mouth of theirs, or there's a dark-looking particle effect coming from its back, then the gacha was either fighting, or there was another gacha of the same gender nearby. Gachas are a passive tame and can be tamed by feeding them anything and everything you've ever acquired in your entire playtime in ARK. They will eat that like Rosie O'Donnell at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Simply walk up and drop the items on the ground, and the gacha will begin eating. Like any other tame on ARK, though, they have their preferences for food and will tame faster or have a higher effectiveness with certain food types than others. While they don't have a kibble necessarily, their top 3 foods, at least to this date, are text structures, metal structures, and element, but you can certainly tame them with anything you can think of. It should be noted that whenever you're feeding the gacha will eat 20 of the item at a time if the item is stackable. The less bites that it takes, the better the taming effectiveness will be. Because of this, you should always drop all of the item using to tame it at once, because the gacha will eat what is necessary and will leave the rest on the ground after it is tamed. If you only drop a few of the item at a time, that still counts as a bite, so it'll directly impact the taming effectiveness. So for example, if you're dropping 5 foundations instead of 20 foundations at a time, the taming effectiveness will be much lower because it's taking more bites to tame it. A gacha's taming effectiveness will drop fast, so this is another reason to also have all the food in front of it from the start, as opposed to only dropping a little bit at a time. Gachas are one of ARK's most complicated creatures, while also being one of the most simplistic. In terms of controls, gachas have very little. They have a left mouse button swipe, a right mouse button smash, but they're both very slow and hit about as hard as a 4-year-old with a pull noodle. They cannot jump or climb with the spacebar, and they have no alternative control ability. Gachas do have an affinity for weight, and also possess a 50% weight reduction for metal, stone, wood, and fungal wood, but you won't be using these guys for harvesting or transporting anything. The gacha's real use comes into play with their complex production mechanic. Gachas are like living garbage disposals and will eat anything you give to them. As a byproduct from eating those things, they will produce a crystal on their back, and when they've eaten enough, the crystal will fall to the ground, allowing you to pick it up. The crystal can be one of 2 things, a resource crystal or an item crystal. When opening a resource crystal, the resource that you get is dependent upon what your gacha can produce. And to see what they can produce, simply bring up the scroll menu and look under the production tab. Each gacha is able to produce different resources and can produce up to 6 from the overall pool of resources available. A list of all those resources is on the screen now, but please note that some of those are more rare to acquire than others. When opening an item crystal, the item that you get is dependent upon the tier quality of the crystal. Think of it like loot crates or supply drops that you would find throughout ARK. The quality of the crystal can range from Ramshackle all the way up to Ascendant. It's worth mentioning that just because a crystal is one quality does not mean that you will get the same quality of an item out of it. So for example, if you have a Journeyman crystal, when you open it you may get a Mastercraft item. This production mechanic is insanely useful. You can harvest resources of your choice right from your base, or more importantly, at least for most people, you can get some very high-end gear. We're talking far better than anything a max crafting speed character can produce, even with the highest end blueprint. Of course, your loot from the gacha crystals is random, and nothing's guaranteed, so crafters still have their place. Because of some of the complexities of how to farm gacha crystals effectively, I'm going to break this down as simple as I can. Invest all feat points into crafting skill, as this increases the gacha's speed at producing crystals, and also the quantity or the quality of the crystal. There's been testing done that shows a shift at about 160% crafting skill mark. Up to 160% seems to yield higher amounts of resource crystals, and over that 160% mark seems to yield more item crystals. Gachas are emotional creatures. You can tell what a gacha's mood is by looking at their facial expression. If it's smiling, it's happy. If it's frowning, or if there's a dark cloud-looking particle effect coming from its back, it's sad. And if it's jittery as it's Charlie Sheen. Gachas don't like being around each other, unless it's only one other gacha of the opposite gender, which will mate boost the pair. Tamed gachas of the same gender must be kept more than 12 foundations away from each other. A single gacha by itself has actually been tested to produce more than a single gacha in a mate-boosted pair. However, with the pair, you have two gachas side by side, thus the production of crystals is far faster. If the gacha has snow owl pellets in its inventory, it will automatically eat one before eating any of the items you're trying to feed it. This will give it a glowing buff on its back. Gachas will produce crystals at a much faster rate, and at a higher quantity in the case of resource crystals, or a higher quality in the case of item crystals whenever they have eaten a snow owl pellet. It is highly recommended that you don't even feed the gacha anything unless they have snow owl pellets in their inventory to eat first, because it makes the whole process far more profitable. There is a lot of testing out there right now that indicates some of the best items to feed a gacha once it's tame. If you're looking for item crystals, the top 3 items at this point in time seem to be war maps, electrical cables, and structures, because all of these items are easy to mass produce and they're all stackable. For resource crystals, stackable basic resources such as stone, wood, or thatch seem to be effective, as the gacha is less likely to produce a higher quality crystal. Remember, the gacha follows the same post-tame rule as it does pre-tame, so it will eat 20 of an item in a stack if the item is stackable. If the item is not stackable, the gacha will eat that item only and will produce a crystal based off of that item. But that is assuming the gacha is under the effects of the snow owl pellet buff. Otherwise, they may eat more of the item to produce a crystal. And one final tip, whips can be pretty useful for picking up multiple crystals that might be lying on the ground, but just know that if you hit the gachas accidentally, you will have to reposition them. Alright, that pretty much wraps up everything you need to know about taming a gacha. Everything presented in this video was the result of personal testing that I've done and test results presented by the ARK community. I hope it was helpful, and if it was, please be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me comments down below because I love comments.